This is a short video as a follow-up to two other videos that I posted about hypersonic missile defense using cross-polarization jamming. And this is going to be hopefully short, so here's what I'm going to cover. So I want to say thank you. I want to explain what I mean by why I would say it's necessary to do an unbiased, objective assessment of cross-pol jamming, who is Sky Industries, and I'd like to answer a few questions that appear in the comments. So starting off, thank you everyone for looking at these videos. I never thought for 1 second that anybody would look at these videos, but thank you, and thank you also for the interesting, insightful, thought-provoking comments, and also for the complimentary ones, so thank you for those. And off the top, I want to point you to another video. It's not mine. It was posted 2 years ago. The title is, and here's the link, the hypersonic missile vulnerability that no one talks about. If you Google that, you'll turn up the link. Very interesting. This fellow came to the same conclusion as I did independently. I hadn't seen the video before I posted mine, but yeah, the missiles, the guided hypersonic missiles have to slow down at the end to supersonic speeds. And he explains that better than I can. So it's worth a look. I highly recommend. So the second point, I said it late in the second video. I think it's a good idea, it's necessary to do an objective, unbiased assessment of cross-pol jamming without hearsay. So why would I say that? Well, because I've seen some things in my professional life that lead me to believe that that is necessary. For example, many years ago, speaking in general terms, a group of experts were asked by the higher-ups within, military circles, I suppose I could say, hey, we heard that cross-pol jamming might be good against this particular missile, and can you just go out there and find out about that? So it was handed over to some technical people who do know about the weapon system that they're handling. And so a little bit of background. Missiles are guided missiles, RF guided missiles. They're only meant to work for 2-3 minutes at a time. So the designers, they don't care about the wear. A friend told me about a great quote. I think it was a true advertising quote, either by Hughes or Raytheon or something. It said, "The world leader in single-use systems," which made me laugh, but it's true. Anyway, the main issue, one of the issues of these things, is to keep them alive. The seeker head. I'm talking about the seeker head, just the front part of the missile that we would want to use for tests to explore the effects of jamming. It's called exploitation, foreign material exploitation. You can look it up online. And we want to keep these things cool because the designers don't care if they burn up because they're going to hit something. They're supposed to hit something. So to do that, you take off the radome and you can take off what's called the can, which is the metal skin of the missile, exposing the card cages and whatever else is in there, microwave parts, whatever. And we can blow air across them and keep them cool, which never happened when they're operating. But we can do that to keep them alive. So this is what's normally done. So I understand. I don't get to participate in that part. And so the chaps went to explore this. But they had removed the can because that's how we keep the missile alive. And we can test for long periods of time without letting it cool down for a few hours, kind of thing. But the metal skin also includes the ring to which the radome attaches. So if you take the skin off, you can't attach the radome. And for normal tests, like, range deception or anything but cross-pol, you probably really don't need the radome. It changes the side lobe structure of the antenna pattern a little bit, but it's inconsequential to range deception countermeasures. But it's very important to cross-pol. So the fellows went out and did the test in their lab. They did the test, but without the radome. And they came back with the conclusion that cross-pol doesn't have any effect at all. But the mistake was that they didn't have the weapon in its flight configuration, which normally they didn't, and it didn't matter. But in this case, it did. And so the conclusion reported back up the food chain is cross-pol doesn't work. And that can persist for 10 years. Once it's checked, if it's checked wrong, that's the hearsay and the supposition and then an error could be present in a conclusion, and it will never be corrected unless someone takes a proper second look. So there's that. And in another instance, I'm aware of, was testing with a group, and my nose told me that I just think that, because I've written this kind of software before, like the software that's driving this thing, I just have this suspicion that there's something wrong there. Could be something wrong there. So I asked, can we look at the software that runs this thing and see? And yes. So we had, it was 4 of us looking at the code, and I can see with my eyes, because it's well-written code, aha, my suspicion was correct, that this, it is an error. Guaranteed it's an error. I look at the variable names, look at the description of what's being done here. I thought so. And, so I pointed it out, I said, that's got to be an error. But nobody was willing to say, of the others, was willing to say, no, that's an error. No, it's more like the answer was, well, we got to talk to the software designers, the coders. But the coders are long gone. So it's not possible to ask anybody. Nobody else has confidence to say, in that particular instance, to say, yeah, that's an error. We need to get to the bottom of that. So that will persist also indefinitely until somebody finds it. And it reminds me of a funny story. I was taking a missile course years ago. And there's an older fellow, and he's younger than me, I'm sure, at this point. But anyway, he said, he has a southern accent. He said, there are soup bones in missiles. And we're in the audience, and he was a retired fellow, and he had a lot of hands-on experience. Yes, there are soup bones in missiles. What does he mean by that? He said, my wife, she sends me to the butcher shop when her my mother-in-law comes over for a stay, and she says, get me a soup bone and tell the butcher to cut it in half. And I said, yeah, okay. So he does that, and he comes back, and because they're making soup, I guess his mother-in-law likes to make soup with her daughter, and so they've been doing this for years. And he said to his wife, how come we have to cut the soup bone in half? And his wife said, well, I don't know, my mother always did that. Like, the marrow will come out no matter what while you're boiling it. So the mother-in-law was there. So he asked his mother-in-law, she said, how come you want the butcher to cut the soup bone in half? And the mother-in-law said, well, I only had a small pot when I was growing up. And he said, so there's things like that in missiles, where there's stuff in there, we don't know why that's in there, but we don't want to take it out, because we don't know what it does. So anyway, all that to say, it is necessary to take a second look at these things to be sure. And people may say, well, Crosspol, the Crosspol gain is too low, and there's like arm flapping going on, just a bunch of just so statements without actually doing the hard part, which is the calculation. And a thoughtfully designed experiment. And that's what's necessary. So that's enough about that. Okay, well, the next point, who is Sky Industries? Well, that Sky Industries is me. There's nobody else. At this point, I started work in 1985 in a government research lab here in Ottawa, and I was recruited into radar countermeasures, and the Cold War was booming, so there's a lot of activity in that, and I specialized in active onboard angle deception countermeasures like cross polarization jamming and another one called cross-eye jamming. There aren't very many things you can do, cross-pol and cross-eye, and I invented a couple myself, polarization cross-eye and double cross, which had a name, but nobody ever explained what it was. So here's what it is to me. Anyway, and some other things too. And I wrote Engaged, I'll talk about it in a minute. I wrote that to answer some questions that I was intellectually curious about. I mean, you can't solve these problems with a pencil and paper. You have to have software. So I wrote software to answer questions, and some of the questions were asked for paying work, for contract work, but the contracts were not to develop Engaged, so this is my tools that I bring along with me to solve a problem. And it's been going on for 25 years. I started Engaged like 25 years ago. And anyway, in my career, I've been very lucky to do some travel and to get a lot of trials experience in which with in some cases real missile seekers and their autopilots if they were available, in anechoic chambers and air carry tests, and on the plane, and at sea tests and overland tests and laboratory bench tests and so forth. So, and in most of those cases I ran the show. I was a trials director, which I like because I know what to do. I know what's going next, and I have a good nose for, there's a clue here, let's follow that string and let's ignore that one. So I was lucky, very lucky to get. Now I can't talk about that work, that's not allowed, but I can talk about generalities and I can talk about the things that I know, but nothing in great detail. So that's how it is. And I'll just tack on, like, what interests me about this, like, why would anybody get involved in this? What interests me is the process of the work. I'm interested in the application of the scientific method. That's where we get an idea about how something works, and we make a model of it, a mathematical model, and that has to be translated into a software model. And then we use that model to make a prediction. Like, wow, this model says, when I run that, it says something really interesting or cool should happen. There should be an effect. And so then we go and design an experiment to see, like, does that effect actually happen? Is it true? Is it right in the real world? So we do the experiment, and then we do the data analysis, which nobody ever seems to want to do. They just want to treat it like a video game and see what happens, and there's no insight. But you have to do the data analysis. And I'll tell you something, data analysis is about questions and answers. And if you don't have the questions, you damn sure won't get the answers. So that is the hard part. At the beginning of a trial, you have to do the data, plan the data analysis. It tells you what to gather. It tells you what kind of experiments to do, because most of the time there's a short little window. It's very, very, very expensive. Time windows are hard to get. So you have to be fully planned ahead of time. And when you're done, then you have to, and this is expensive and unpopular, but you have to go and analyze the data. And 100% of the time that I have been meticulous about that, I've found something. 100% of the time. Do the thing, my advice to the upcoming generation is do the thing that you don't think anybody else would do. Do that. It's hard, it's meticulous, it's boring, but it's like mining for diamonds. Diamonds come from a rock called bluestone, and you have to mine tons of bluestone to find one little diamond chip. And data analysis after trials is like that. So do the hard thing. Get down on your hands and knees, use your hands, use your eyes, use your mind, and you'll find some fascinating things. I have 100% of the time. So that's what interests me, is the process, and particularly real-time ECM effectiveness assessment, so the jammer knows if it's working or not. Because the number one question, I've been told by military people, the number one question when they get a new piece of EW equipment is, how do I know if it's working? And that's a very good question. So anyway, that's enough about that. I had to think about it, and I'm thinking maybe that's not actually enough of that, because I didn't do the last step. I didn't close the loop between the prediction, the software and the math model and software model, and the prediction made by that, and the experiment that we carefully do. And of course, the purpose of the experiment is to test the hypothesis. And if the prediction agrees with the outcome of the experiment, assuming that the experiment was done correctly in the first place, and that's critical, then if they agree, then that is some evidence that the original hypothesis is correct and that the model has validity for the thing that we're interested in. And if it disagrees, then we have to go back, and the experiment was done correctly, then we have to go back to the beginning and refine the models and make another prediction and do this loop, which is called the scientific method. And the objective here is to discover the properties of the real world and establish some facts. And I think I'll just tack the last part on. I don't think most people know what a fact is, like a definition of the fact. And here's the definition that I like and that I use and I find useful. A fact is the outcome of an experiment that has been done so many times with the same result that we just decide not to do the experiment anymore. Example, the sun will come up tomorrow. It might not, but it's come up so many times in a row that we don't bother to look anymore. Or fact, water boils, standard temperature and pressure boils at 100 degrees Celsius. We could do the experiment again. It might not, but it's happened so many times that way that we don't do the experiment anymore. And this is the beauty of science. It's a self-correcting philosophy. If somebody says water boils at 140 degrees Celsius at standard temperature and pressure, we can all do the experiment and just come back and everybody says, no, we didn't get that. Or can you please explain? So anyway, that is all I have to say about that for the time being. So to finish off by answering a couple of questions. Well, one of the questions that shows up repeatedly in the comments, comment section is, well, people really got the idea that putting a ceramic radome over the missile increases its vulnerability to cross-pole jamming, especially if it's pointy. So logical question is, what happens if we drop the radome? Why can't we just eject or jettison the radome, like break it apart and let it peel off? Well, I'm not a missile designer in that sense at all, but that to me seems like a very risky proposition for the missile. I mean, how do you guarantee that a piece of a brittle, hard, relatively heavy thing like a chunk of radome isn't going to peel off or a fin off the missile or tear a hole down the side and ruin the round? But supposing you could do that, supposing you could design a system that ejects, gets rid of the radome, and underneath it is a polyamide or polyamide or anyway, thermoplastic radome. The issue is you still have a problem. The polyamide radome will still cause vulnerability to crosspol, no matter what antenna is underneath there. You take a flat plate array, without the radome, it has no negligible crosspol response. But I've tried it. And you put the radome on, whole different story. The wheels fall off. So you have to have a radome. Can you imagine a missile flying at like blinding speed, even at high, supersonic speed? That's 8/10 of a kilometer per second. One Mississippi, that thing just traveled almost a kilometer. So you don't have a radome. The wind's just going to peel everything off. It's a comical idea. So you have to have a radome, and you still have that problem. Another question: how do I get a copy of Engage? Well, I wish everybody had a copy of Engage. Might say I'm biased because I wrote it, but I think it's a wonderful piece of software. I enjoy the hell out of it using it. And what I have discovered and put into the design is, it's very, very important to get insights, that the speed at which things happen. If you ask a question in your mind, you have to see the answer. I have to see the answer right away. No, save a file, get another application open, graph it, compare two graphs, go through pages of logbooks and so. No, got to see that immediately. So Engage works that way. And the other thing I found is, this is sort of a motherhood thing, but it is possible to get a real insight. It might take months or even a year to write a software application that I only have to run once. 2 or 3 times, maybe only once, to get the insight. So the ratio of the time to create software and the time to get the insight, there is no relationship. It could be minutes to write the software and minutes to seconds to get the answer. It could be a year to write a sub-application. And Engage is a suite of applications. But anyway, I've written it, and I've written a lot of software, but I am not a software designer. No how, no way. So when I went through my education, there was no such thing as the modern software standards that we have now. So Engage is it's like an amateur wrote it. So, but it works. It's clunky. Parts of it are clunky, but it works. But what it really needs is for somebody, it's not a commercial product, but what it needs is somebody to apply a modern software standard to this thing. And then it could become a product. So if there's anybody out there who wants to take that on, then contact me. My email's in the video description. And then the last thing is, a couple of people, a few have said, well, isn't this classified, talking about the hypersonic missile defense using cross-pole jamming, isn't this classified? And the answer is no. Only governments can classify things. Private individuals and companies cannot. So now, private companies can apply a company trade secret or a know-how, or they can make it internally confidential, but they cannot apply government like secret, top secret, confidential, protected, whatever variety of these things are. So no, and what these videos are is they're about things that I have learned using no classified sources. It's all in the open, and it is based on these things are based on the laws of physics and electromagnetics, and to a lesser extent thermodynamics. So this is unclassified stuff. Now there are other things that I can't classify, but I am not putting them on the internet because they just don't belong there. They're not suitable for YouTube. They are not suitable for Telephone conversations, they are not suitable for email. So there's other stuff, but it's not ever going to be in those forums. But I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to, with the right credentials, and who has a budget. Sky Industries is not a museum, it's a store, and everything is for sale, including me and my time. And when I show up to work on your project, I bring my tools with me and the know-how. Nothing classified, not allowed, but the know-how, yes. So the shingle is out. My shingle is out. You can acquire my services, but we have to have a budget, and then we can talk about some other things. And I think that would be very useful and lucrative for our large defense corporations and defense departments and so forth. So anyway, in conclusion, thank you again for looking at these videos, and be posting more.